There's a specific shopping list that almost never shows up on mainstream prepper forums, but it's the one thing every long-term off-grid household has in common. Walk into the pantry, the barn, or the root cellar of a family that has survived a real grid-down winter, and you'll find the same 11 items stacked floor to ceiling, bought again and again, year after year. Today we're breaking down the 11 emergency supplies off-grid families buy in bulk, why each one earns its place, and which one most people get wrong. Let's get into it. Before the countdown, it helps to understand why this list looks so different from what you'd find on a big box store's survival aisle. Off-grid families aren't preparing for a 3-day power outage. They're preparing for a scenario that lasts months, where nothing gets delivered, nothing gets repaired by a technician, and every resource has to stretch far longer than anyone budgeted for. That's the mindset behind all 11 items on this list. If this kind of self-sufficiency content is your thing, this is a good moment to hit subscribe, because we're about to get specific. Salt doesn't spoil, doesn't need refrigeration, and does something almost nobody thinks about until it's too late. It preserves meat without electricity, but it has to be the right salt. Off-grid families specifically stock non-iodized canning or pickling salt, since iodine and anti-caking agents can discolor cured meat and interfere with the cure. For actual meat preservation, they also keep curing salts like Prague Powder number 1 or number 2 on hand, because plain table salt on its own can't reliably prevent botulism in long-term meat curing. A single 25-pound bag of canning salt, paired with the right curing salt, can mean the difference between a freezer full of spoiled meat and a winter's worth of food. Salt alone still won't save your protein supply, though. Item 10 is what actually keeps it edible long-term. Beginners skip this one constantly. And it's the item that undoes everything else on this list if ignored. Rice, beans, and flour bought in bulk will still degrade and attract pests within a year if left in their original packaging. Mylar bags paired with oxygen absorbers create an airtight, light-blocking seal that can push shelf life from a matter of months to well over 20 years. Off-grid families don't just buy bulk grain. They buy the packaging that makes bulk grain worth buying in the first place. There's a real debate here. Freeze-dried food is lighter and rehydrates faster, but it costs significantly more per calorie than home dehydrated produce. Most seasoned off-grid households run both, freeze-dried for high-value proteins and dairy, home dehydrated for garden surplus. The families who get this wrong tend to buy one type exclusively and end up with a pantry that's either too expensive to restock or nutritionally unbalanced. Getting the ratio right matters more than the total volume. A Berkey or similar gravity filter is the standard, but the backup layer is what separates a serious stockpile from a hopeful one. Purification tablets don't fail mechanically, don't need cleaning, and store almost indefinitely. That's why they're bought in bulk quantities that look excessive until you run the math. A single adult needs roughly a gallon a day just for drinking, before cooking or hygiene enters the picture. Most families underestimate that number by half. Communication is the supply category people remember last and regret ignoring first. A hand crank radio with a NOAA weather band doesn't just entertain. It's the only way to receive emergency broadcasts once cell towers and internet infrastructure go down. Off-grid families buy these in 2s and 3s, not because one breaks often, but because a shared household needs more than one listening point. Disposable batteries are a liability in a long-term scenario. They're bulky, they leak over time, and eventually you run out. Off-grid households standardize almost entirely on rechargeable NIMH batteries paired with a small solar panel bank, so the supply never truly runs dry as long as there's sunlight. It sounds simple, but it's one of the most underfunded items on this entire list. This isn't just a convenience kit. Off-grid families lean on these three materials constantly for shelter repair, tool improvisation, fencing, and emergency medical splinting. What sets this apart from the version in a typical hardware store bin is quantity. Households in this niche buy Paracord by the 1,000-foot spool, not the 50-foot coil, because actual consumption over a multi-month scenario runs far higher than most people assume. Storing wheat berries is only half the equation. You still need a way to turn them into flour without electricity. A hand-crank grain mill is one of the more expensive single purchases on this list, but it's what makes the entire bulk grain strategy work instead of just sitting on a shelf. Families who skip this step often discover, mid-crisis, that they're holding hundreds of pounds of food they have no way to prepare. Home canning solves a problem that dehydrated food can't: fat content. Freeze-dried meals typically strip fat for shelf stability, but the human body under physical stress needs it. Off-grid families pressure can meats and broths, specifically to cover that gap, in volumes that look extreme, hundreds of jars, until you realize how much fat a single adult in a caloric deficit actually needs compared to a typical grocery list. It has to be a pressure canner, not a water bath canner. Low-acid foods like meat and broth need the higher temperatures a pressure canner reaches to kill botulism spores. Lard follows a different process entirely. It's rendered down and stored cold in the fridge, freezer, or a cool root cellar rather than sealed in jars, since home canning pure fat is a recognized USDA botulism risk. Nutritional gaps and physical injuries are the two things that end an off-grid family's resilience fastest, and food storage alone doesn't solve either one. A trauma kit built around real field medicine principles, like tourniquets, hemostatic gauze, and suture material, matters more than a generic first aid box. On the nutrition side, off-grid families lean on broad-spectrum multivitamins and electrolyte supplements to cover the gaps in a grain-heavy, meat-scarce diet, rather than reaching for high-dose iron. Iron is different from most supplements in that the body has no easy way to get rid of excess. Without medical supervision, high-dose iron can build up to toxic, even fatal levels, a risk that's especially serious for men and postmenopausal women who are more prone to iron overload. Every item on this list is useless without the knowledge to apply it correctly, and knowledge is the one resource you can't stockpile digitally when the grid is gone. Off-grid families keep physical books, canning guides, herbal medicine references, mechanical repair manuals, specifically because a phone or tablet becomes a paperweight the moment its battery dies for the last time. It's the least glamorous item on this list, and it's the one many experienced off-grid families say they'd protect first if they could only save one. That's the full list. None of these items work in isolation. The salt only matters if the Mylar bags keep the grain edible, and the grain only matters if the mill can turn it into flour. Off-grid resilience isn't a matter of buying the most stuff. It's a matter of buying things that support each other when nothing outside your property is working anymore. Stockpiling only solves half the problem, though. None of it matters much if your food spoils, your water goes stale, or your family can't survive the heat while you're relying on it. So in the next video, we're covering a system that can drop the temperature inside a structure by dozens of degrees using nothing but clay, water, and airflow. No compressor, no refrigerant, not a single watt pulled from a battery or a grid. If the 11 items on this list are what keep you fed and prepared, that system is what keeps you and everything you've stored alive long enough to use it.